Welcome, welcome on this very hot day. It's so hot it can take the energy out of you. We don't expect it in early June. We had a glimmer of it. We knew we weren't going to go for anything from winter, except from winter to summer without any spring at all. But we were teased because we had 3 or 4 good days in a row of what was supposedly seasonable weather. But I think what we have to do is get it out of our heads that there's anything seasonable anymore. I think what we have to assume is that every season is going to be full of extremes. And you know, I told you not too long ago that Chicago is doing something rather brilliant by assuming that by the year 2070, right now they have 15 days a year over 90 degrees, and by 2070, which isn't so far away, they assume that they will have 70 days above 90 degrees. So in anticipation of this, Mayor Daley, the former Mayor Daley, coming out of the Kyoto conference in Japan about 10 or 15 years ago, convened all of his cabinet and budget directors and said, we've got a plan for this. So sure enough, Street by Street in Chicago is being remade with a combination, instead of regular asphalt, which is what we have here, which, as we know, cracks and breaks as soon as we have extremes of cold or heat. They have redone this with some kind of a rubberized mixture that they are manufacturing that will be able to give and take more in hot temperatures. But more importantly than that, they spend $10 million a year on tree planting in the city of Chicago. And they are now planting trees that you would find more in Alabama or Atlanta than you would normally in Chicago, because they know that their beautiful Norway maples and these extraordinary oaks that provide 17% of tree cover in Chicago right now will not last once these heat waves continue. And I'm wondering, what are we doing here in Connecticut, here in the Northeast in New York? Have you heard about anybody planning for many, many 90-degree days? It looks like we're going to have them. It looks like we're going to have much more extreme and extremely hot summers. How will our plant life survive? How will our insect population change? What will migrate northward or southward that didn't used to be here? And how are we planning for potholes and cracks in asphalt for the future? One of the things I know that we can do is increase gravel versus asphalt. Gravel obviously gives and takes. It doesn't break. It doesn't require petroleum. Asphalt requires oil. And it's a lot better for the environment because when it rains, there's no runoff. It goes right into the ground. Now, I'm not suggesting we return to dirt roads on our highways and byways, but there are a lot of other places where we could do pavers with green in between and over them that would be fine for cars. There are a lot of parking lots that do not have to be these huge, wide asphalt places. They don't have to be. They could be gravel-like. They could have pavement with the green grass cover on them. We could have a lot more choices. What we don't have right now are incentives in our local planning and zoning codes for private industry people to put alternate sources of covering on their property. In fact, the opposite is true. The towns insist that a lot of things be paved over for parking. They don't need to be. I'm thinking about this because Tom Friedman today, in today's New York Times, wrote a really interesting, as he usually does, op-ed piece called "The Earth is Full." And he writes, you really do have to wonder whether a few years from now we'll look back at the first decade of the 21st century when food prices spiked, energy prices soared, world population surged, tornadoes plowed through cities, floods, and droughts set records, populations were displaced, and governments were threatened by the confluence of it all, and ask ourselves, what were we thinking? How did we not panic when the evidence was so obvious that we'd crossed some growth, climate, natural resource, population red lines all at once? And then he goes on to say in his article, the only answer can be denial, which, as my friend Ellen always tells me, is not just a river in Egypt. And it's true. The human response to all of these bad things happening seems to be denial. We push it out of our brains. I think it's true in our personal lives as well, don't you? When things are cascading and we can't handle things, we'll go shopping, we'll spend money we don't have, we'll watch television for hours at a time and transport ourselves into other people's fantasy lands. We'll spend virtual hours online on Facebook instead of grappling with the fact that We've got problems right in front of us that maybe we can't solve so easily. We have relationship issues. We have job issues. We have money problems, health concerns, whatever they are. Denial is really powerful. Sometimes denial is very healthy. But as a human race right now, I don't think so. Tom Friedman says there's something called the Global Footprint Network, which is an alliance of scientists which calculates how many planet Earths we need to sustain our current growth rates. And this GFN, this Global Footprint Network, measures how much land and water area we will need to produce the resources we consume and absorb our waste using the technology we have today. And on the whole, they conclude we are currently growing at a rate that is using up the Earth's resources far faster than they can be sustainably replenished. We are eating right now into our future. Right now, global growth is using 1.5 Earths. And according to Mr. Gilding of the Global Footprint Network, he writes, having only one planet makes this a rather significant problem, which may be the real reason we're going to Mars and ultimately end up trashing the moon, as we've trashed our global orbit around us. And Tom Friedman goes on to write, this is not science fiction. If you cut down more trees than you grow, you run out of trees. If you put additional nitrogen into a water system, you change the type and quantity of life that water can support. If you thicken the Earth's CO2 blanket, the Earth gets warmer. If you do all these things and many more at once, you change the way the whole system of planet Earth behaves, with social, economic, and life support impacts. This is not speculation. This is high school science. And it's also current affairs. Today, Drudge Report reporting the news that China, for the first time, exceeded the energy consumption of the United States. Now, that really, in a perfect world, would seem perfectly reasonable and equitable because China has a lot more people than we do. They've got, about 2 billion of the world's 6 to 7 billion right in China. We've got 300 million. So, honestly, they should have exceeded it a long time ago. But the fact is that America, we're such a consuming nation, we don't know how to stop. So we consume not only our own resources, but we go everywhere we can to consume the world's resources. China's only catching up to us. Well, they've caught up and then some in terms of the volume of energy that they're consuming and they're not producing to sustain. They acknowledged a long time ago that they had a population problem. They tried to get it under control using the most horrific ways by having a one-child per family policy in which abortion was mandatory, even in the 8th month. And many, many infants are left to die once they're born if they're not the right gender or they are, mentally retarded. They are in some way challenged physically or deformed. I mean, if you're only allowed to have one child, you want that child to be the perfect child. And if that child isn't perfect, you don't want that child. And China's been operating under that for a long time. But we have other places in the world with completely unsustainable populations where women are having 10, 12 children. And these are, frankly, the most ignorant parts of the world, the poorest parts of the world, the parts of the world that can least sustain a growing population. And yet, where are the world leaders clamoring for change in those populations? Where are they clamoring for reasonable sex education? They're not, because so many of those places have, and I will say this, backward religious teachings that tell them that they can't use any birth control whatsoever because their husband, not to mention God, doesn't want them to. And that is not only anti-intellectual and irrational, but it doesn't serve anybody well, even those poor women that are having 10 and 12 children, most especially those poor women. Most especially. So we have populations growing out of control around the world. We have report upon report that we have a planet that can't sustain it. And in the meantime, we're in denial. Would you not agree with that? Don't you think we are in denial? I think one of the reasons we're in denial is because as individuals we feel helpless. Like you and I feel like, what can we do about it? We go about our business in the United States. We're not really the problem. Most of us are not having 20 children, despite what you might see on the Learning Channel or Discovery. What was the name of that crazy program? You know which one I mean, with the reality show where they keep being proud of having babies. I couldn't remember the names if I had 20 kids. I can barely call Jonathan and Joanna now by their names. I'm always saying them wrong. And they're proud of it. And we have Octomom, who really doesn't deserve to be a mom of even one, having 8. But, you know, these are individual problems with individual physicians. I blame the doctors. I don't blame the women. The women have wants. They're sick. They're sick in the head. If the doctors facilitate it, it's a knowing person's liability, in my view. In other words, somebody who's rational should say to her, I'm not putting in 8 eggs into your body. I'll put in 2. If you have twins, you have twins. Good enough. By the way, that's the law in Europe. Did you know that? Only in the United States are we Michigan enough to do stuff like this, to treat women like they're cows or dogs with puppy litters. It's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not the way the body was built. No way. Body was not built for 8 children at a time or 6 children at a time. Twins, yes. Triplets occasionally. Quads once in a great while. That's just about it. That's just about it. We're not cows. We weren't built for litters. Even cows have 1 or 2 calves. It's puppies that have 8 and 9. Right? It's dogs that have 8 and 9. So in the meantime, we have crazy kinds of ways of having children in this country, but we are not essentially considering ourselves responsible for population. But we are really responsible for consuming. We are really responsible for consuming. So let me tell you some more about what Tom Friedman reports today. He reports that the people that know about this call this right now the Great Disruption, with a capital G, capital D. And he says that Paul Gilding of this organization I told you about says, our response will be proportionally dramatic, mobilizing as we do in war. We will change at a scale and speed we can barely imagine today, completely transforming our economy, including our energy and transport industries in just a few short decades. He really believes that people are going to go to a model in which they work less and own less. Do you think Americans are capable of that? A model in which, I know we're working less, but we're working less, frankly, because we don't have jobs. Do you think that we're going to be moving to a model in which owning less becomes something that we can be proud of? I don't see that yet. I think we have a very acquisitive culture in the United States. I think we define everything by how much money we make, how many new homes are built, how many cars are sold. Until we change the ways in which we measure how well we're doing, I disagree with the optimist that Tom Friedman is talking about. I don't think that we're ever going to become a less consuming culture until we change the way we look at what it means to be a healthy economy.